Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, doing deep prajna paramita, clearly saw emptiness of all the 5 conditions, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. O Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness exactly form. Sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness are likewise like this. O Shariputra, all dharmas are forms of emptiness, not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure, without loss, without gain. So, in emptiness there is no form, no sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no colour, sound, smell, taste, touch, phenomena, no realm of sight, no realm of consciousness, no ignorance and no end to ignorance, no old age and death and no end to old age and death, no suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing, no path, no wisdom and no gain. No gain, and thus the Bodhisattva lives prajna paramita with no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, therefore no fear. Far beyond deluded thoughts, this is nirvana. All past, present and future Buddhas live prajna paramita and therefore attain anuttara samyak sambodhi. Therefore know prajna paramita is the great mantra, the vivid mantra, the best mantra, the unsurpassable mantra. It completely clears all pain. This is the truth, not a lie. So set forth the prajna paramita mantra, set forth this mantra and say, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Sva, Prajna Heart Sutra. So that's the version that we ordinarily use in ordinary mind. It's called the Maha-Prajna Paramita Heart Sutra. Maha is great, or prajna. That's our first kind of stumbling block. Traditionally it's often translated as wisdom. So it can be translated as wisdom beyond wisdom, but wisdom sounds like something we can have. And you don't wisdom something. So it sounds quite like a thing, and it sounds making us superior. Maybe it's not that. We can call it understanding. And I think Thai translated it as perfect understanding in this case. Because the paramita are the Buddhist virtues, maybe isn't quite the right word, perfections, the aspects of the path that one should cultivate. And it's a wrong translation, but there's a translation which derives that, I don't mean modern translation, I mean this is when people are trying to work out what did this word mean, like 2,000 years ago, of paramita meaning the other shore. So it's the wisdom, the understanding that can take you to the other shore. What's the other shore? What's the meaning of getting there? So I can't remember that wonderful quote about an enigma packed inside a mystery, packed inside a whatever. But this sutra it's a bit like that because, well, read it as just plain sense. It's mumbo jumbo of the worst sort, gobbledygook. Maybe then it's a wonderful metaphor for something. Well, actually I don't think so either. There's not really any metaphor in here. It's not paraphrasing things. So maybe it's an mystical evocation of a beyond, an elsewhere, a world of perfection. And of course, what it's actually doing is undercutting that very notion of a somewhere else, a something else. So it's kind of none of these. So if we've ruled out all of those, what are we actually left with? Seems to be largely the word no or not, which we repeat endlessly. So what's the meaning of all this no, all this negation? Whatever it is, it's going to emerge out of these questionings. So is it just woofy philosophical nonsense? Well, no to that as well, because it's the little verse, the little poem, the little sutra, which has sustained Mahayana practice. So that's Tibetan practice, Zen practice, most of the more esoteric Chinese and Japanese schools, as, heart of practice. And it is the Heart Sutra, the heart of our practice for best part of 2,000 years. So clearly it's about something. And it's not abstract. And it's not abstruse. And it's actually totally nitty-gritty. And it's making that connection in ourselves, in our experience. Yeah, in our reality. It wouldn't be a good translation of prajna, prajna. But in this context, I wonder if experience says it. The heart of perfect experience, the heart of true experience. Because it's about experience at every level. And it's about something else as well, because it's, prajna, it's a wisdom sutra. And in Buddhism, we have these two wings. We have wisdom and we have compassion. Or as I prefer to translate them these days, we have understanding and we have care. And it announces itself. It's the Wisdom Sutra, the Understanding Sutra. And what's the first word? Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of great compassion, great care, right at the beginning of understanding, right at the beginning of wisdom. There is compassion, there is care. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, doing deep prajna paramita. Doing seems crazy, but engaged in. Oh yeah, okay. So what does Thich Nhat Hanh say? Avalokiteshvara, we are practicing deeply with the insight that brings us to the other shore. That's the paramita bit. Suddenly discovered that all of the 5 skandhas are equally empty. Okay, so clearly saw emptiness of all the 5 conditions. Yeah, the conditions are weird word too. They're the skandhas, the classic Buddhist heaps. Form, sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness. The kind of 5 modes of encountering the world. Thai has this body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations and consciousness. It's a different sounding list, it's the same list. Thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. Just read that sentence again. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, doing deep prajna paramita, clearly saw the emptiness of all the 5 conditions, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. This is it. This is the business. Buddhism, Zen, is all about suffering. It's the engagement with the practical reality of the different dimensions of our suffering and what on earth we do about that. The encounter with that, our own encounter, the encounter of other beings with it. What we do about that. So, Avalokiteshvara sees the emptiness of sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness, form, and thus completely relieves misfortune and pain. This is translation from the Chinese, So it doesn't tell us exactly who is relieved and exactly who is doing the relieving. But there's no actual reason to think that it's not about relieving misfortune and pain. Absolutely. So that actually is a huge statement. It's an enormous statement. How? What's it work? O Shariputra. This is Avalokiteshvara addressing Shariputra. Shariputra is one of the Buddha's clever disciples, and often in these sutras we have, as we do in Zen stories, we have the very clever disciple and then the cool kid runs rings around them. So in this case, Avalokiteshvara is telling the Buddha's cleverest student exactly what he should be doing, what he should be thinking about. O Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness exactly form. Sensation, conception, discrimination, and awareness are likewise like this. Or, listen, Shariputra. This body itself is emptiness, and emptiness itself is this body. This body is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than this body. The same is true of feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Neither form nor this body are an accurate literal translation of rupa, which is the original Indian term, which actually means stuff. It's matter, it's stuff. But actually this body, because it's the one doing the perceiving, the conceptual stuff, having the emotions and the sensations, is a much, much better translation than form. It doesn't mean form at all. It means stuff. It means matter. It means this. So this body will do nicely, actually. Is empty. And this is what it keeps on saying. Is empty, is empty, is empty. There is no. So the absolute nub of it is, what on earth is this emptiness? Clearly it's not empty. Clearly it's full. And I suppose there's a slight kind of physicsy mood that a lot of modern Buddhists have had. So, well, you get down to it, matter is mainly empty space anyway. No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean anything to do with that at all. It's a different kind. It's in philosophy what we call, it's an epistemological and ontological emptiness. How on earth do we get close to that? We'll come back to this. We'll come back kind of by the side door. O Shariputra, all dharmas are forms of emptiness. Dharmas in this sense are things, phenomena. So all things, all phenomena are forms of emptiness. They're just different forms of emptiness. Not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure, without loss, without gain. And this is where we can begin to go radically wrong, because it sounds like we're talking about some eternal realm here. Because if we've got things which are empty, so they kind of exist, but maybe they don't exist, they're not born, they're not destroyed, clearly they're eternal. Actually, no, they're not. That's the point. They're not stained, they're not pure. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Here we've got the discrimination, we've got the picking and choosing coming in already. They're not stained, they're not pure. And of course, for most traditional Buddhism, the difference between stained and pure is absolutely crucial. So what do we mean saying that all dharmas, they're not only empty, but they're not stained and they're not pure, without loss, without gain? Obviously, in that sense, destruction is a huge loss. But then when we come back to our practice, the fundamental question, why are we here? Not why are we here in the universe, but why are we here? What are we after? What do we want to gain from our practice? And here we are being told there's nothing to gain. And I know that's something we say a lot. No gain, nothing there. So, in emptiness there is no form, no sensation, no conception, no discrimination, awareness. And then we get it begin to sound totally strange. No. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body or mind. No. Colour, sound, smell, taste, touch phenomena. No. Realm of sight. No realm of consciousness. That's a condensation. What we're actually doing here is we're going through all the traditional 6 Buddhist senses. We're going through the thing that does the sensing, we're going through the actual sensing itself, and then we're going through the bit of the consciousness, the bit of the mind, which processes and understands this sensing. Okay, so we're being told there's none of that, and yet clearly I see. Clearly you hear. More strangeness. No ignorance and no end to ignorance, no old age and death, and no end to old age and death. Well, we've been through the 6 senses, and now we're going through, in good Buddhist terms, we're going through the 12 links of dependent origination, starting with ignorance and ending with old age and death. So that's a condensation again. And it's saying, well, okay, this is traditionally how we see, or how we saw, causality in Buddhism. There is ignorance. Because there is ignorance, dum-de-dum-de-dum. Because there is dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum, there is old age and death. Cause and effect. Karma, the magic word, explains everything. Causality, cause, effect. And so we'd be saying there's no cause and effect. Not that either. And in actual fact, at this point, if we haven't already realised, we're going through all of the traditional versions of the Buddhist understanding of how the world works, how the person works, and we're saying no, no, and no, again and again and again. So what comes up? What could come after that? Well, okay, what's, as our American friends would say, what's Buddhism 101? 4 Noble Truths, obviously. Suffering, that suffering has a cause, that suffering can be overcome, and that there is a way of overcoming this suffering. What does the Heart Sutra then say? No suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing, no path, no wisdom, nothing to understand, and no gain. So this is absolutely in the face negation, and it's designed to pull you up short. Now we know as a historical fact that this was actually written quite specifically to challenge a certain kind of interpretation of Buddhism, which ought to make it just a historical curiosity. But actually it keys into something much, 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 much deeper than that. Let's see if Thai's any help here. That is why, in emptiness, body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations and consciousness are not separate self-entities. The 18 realms of phenomena, that's the sense stuff we should be talking about, which are the 6 sense organs, the 6 sense objects, and the 6 consciousnesses, are also not separate self-entities. The 12 links of interdependent arising and their extinction are also not separate self-entities. Ill-being, or suffering, the causes of ill-being, the end of ill-being, the path, insight and attainment are also not separate self-entities. Whoever can see this no longer needs anything to attain. So where we're getting to is the sense of empty as being not separate. And that's when it begins to fall into place. If I am separate, if I am a self-contained, separate self-entity thing like a billiard ball, the same right the way through, always fundamentally the same thing, no matter how much I might change outside, fundamentally separate, only capable of encountering other objects, but not really meeting with them, not really relating to them, then clearly that is a world of separate things. And yet, Buddhism itself tells us that actually the world isn't like that at all. Okay, let's take a classic Buddhist example, a table. We know that a table is a thing in one sense and not in another sense. It's an assembly of pieces of wood, which are assemblies of cellulose fibres, which are assemblies of organic molecules, which are assemblies of atoms, which are assemblies of subatomic particles, blah, 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 blah. As we always say to a woodworm, a table is a tasty feast. To us, it's something you eat off. To a small child, it might be something to play under as a den. The table isn't a thing. The table is always what we call an imputed meaning. It has meaning for us. It has meaning because of this relationship. It isn't a thing in itself. It momentarily assembles, it disassembles, it moves on, gets taken apart, burns, rots, whatever. Gets taken to the recycling centre or back to IKEA, whatever. And so that's the sense in which we talk about not born, not destroyed, no arising, no ceasing, because in a world where there aren't fundamental, self-sufficient things, everything is essentially just a shuffling of relationship. There's the brilliant Buddhist philosopher, thinker, don't know what you call him, Nagarjuna. I believe lived in the 6th century in India. He is the guy who went through and wrote what is the seminal texts of Buddhism that are not read nearly as much as they should be. In 25 chapters, he shows that it's not only that Buddhism thinks that things don't have a separate self, it's that logically you can prove, and he goes through this everything from time, motion, self, consciousness, assemblies of things, suffering, goes through every possible avenue you can think of whereby you would, as we say, impute a separate self either to ourselves, to other beings, or to anything in the world in general, and proves, I think, perfectly reasonably, and a contemporary Buddhist influenced philosopher like J. Garfield thinks this is absolutely straightforwardly self-evident, what Nagarjuna's arguing, that a world of separate things is logically impossible, that it doesn't actually make any sense. And he goes through in minute detail showing why that's true. Because unless relationship is possible, nothing can actually exist anyway. So things which are existent in themselves, rather than being existent in relationship to other things, are actually fundamentally logically impossible. It's a fantastic book to read. It's quite mind-numbing and painful the first few times through. J. Garfield's written some brilliant stuff around it. Once you get into the swim of things, actually, well, of course, it's self-evident. But this is what it's actually talking about. Not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure, without loss, without gain. No form, sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness. No, actually, Thai's translation puts the separate word in. And that's really the key to it all. He says separate self-entity. It's horribly clunky, but it kind of does the job. No separate eye, no separate ear, no separate nose. They're all relationship. They're all aspects of relationship. This relationship that we call seeing, or more generally sensing. The senses, as we know, all interconnect. They create wholes of experience, wholes of perception, wholes of relationship. You can arbitrarily focus down into one particular mode, if you like. But our actual existence in the world is experiencing. I don't see little patches of colour. I see eddy or jail or, it's like that. in the same way, no old age and death. There's no separate things to get old and decay and die. And yet, of course, what's the two things, according to the Tibetans, most important that I know about myself? I will die, and that I don't know the exact moment of my death. We live in this paradox. And it would be easy at this point to say, yes, and when you understand that you are not a separate self, you will not be worried about dying. You will, that's guff, absolute guff. Which of us really experiences that way? We experience ourselves as Malcolm or whoever, however. But we live within that paradox, that tension. Ultimately, there cannot be, it is logically impossible that there are all these separate entities, all these separate beings, and yet that's how we experience the world most of the time. So we live in that tension, in that gap. Which is how we get towards no suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing, no path, no wisdom, and no gain. And again, there's an easy answer here, there's an easy out. There's no suffering. Suffering's unreal. Just, gain control of my mind and there will be no more suffering. Well, no, absolutely not. The suffering is as real as anything else. Oh, but myself isn't real. Well, it's as real as anything else. It's as real as the colour yellow or this microphone in front of me. It's just not absolutely real. It's not separately real. It's a set of relationships. Me, the microphone, you, everything. Relationships. It's the misperception of that which really is the suffering, constitutes the suffering. But there's no stepping back from it because I'm an embodied being, because I'm as real as it gets. As of course are you. So no suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing, no path, no wisdom, and no gain. Which is hard. But then we all know the senses in which we're beginning to talk about no gain in our practice. No gain in life. There is change, there is constant change. Life is nothing but impermanence and change. And some of these feel like gains and some of these feel like utterly soul-destroying losses. But these are all relative and part of this relationship field which I am cannot be anything else than. And the simple understanding of that changes the experience, the nature of the suffering. We translated the beginning, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. Maybe that's quite a nice word. Ending would feel way too strong there. But the Bodhisattva, the enlightenment being, like Avalokiteshvara, who is living prajna paramita, with no hindrance in the mind, as in not seeing everything as separate things, not seeing themselves as something separate from world, has no hindrance, therefore no fear. Far beyond deluded thoughts, this is nirvana. Nirvana in the sense of this is to live with a relieved sense of suffering, a different encountering, a different experience of suffering, right here, right now. And the other thing that Nagarjuna demonstrates, along with the impossibility of separate things, is the absolute identity, the not an atom of difference between nirvana and samsara, between the dreadful realm of suffering and cyclic existence and nirvana. That's a notion which obviously challenges everything which Buddhism thought it was about, and yet this is, exactly this, is the foundation of this second wave Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, of which the Tibetan schools, the Chinese schools, the Japanese schools are all a part. It's an immense thought. This is nirvana. What did you think it was going to be like? All past, present and future Buddhas live prajnaparamita. It's the only game in town. And therefore attain anuttara samyak sambodhi, full and perfect enlightenment. And then we have the outro, which annoys some people. It's a fantastic puff. This is the great mantra, the vivid mantra, the best mantra, the unsurpassable mantra. It completely clears all pain. We are finally back to suffering. Completely clears. We can talk about that. This is the truth, not a lie. So set forth the prajnaparamita mantra, set forth this mantra and say, gate, gone. Gate, gone. Paragate, parasamgate, completely gone to the other shore. Crossed over, crossed beyond. Bodhisattva, hail enlightenment. Prajna Heart Sutra. So this is the wisdom, just this understanding that takes us to the other shore. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. The identity of nirvana and samsara. This is the other shore. Gate, gate. Oh yeah, even gate, it's not even a proper past tense, it's not even properly gone in Sanskrit. Its tense is indeterminate. Gone, going. Again, it just fits so well, this kind of, yeah, well, we're going, but we're already there. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate bodhisattva. Prajna Heart Sutra. It is the sutra one could talk all night about. Whether that's meant anything or not, I don't know. It's taken me decades to work with it this far. I've slipped a bit. I used to recite it every day. It's good to think about every day, absolutely. Recite it in any translation, memorize it. Chinese, Japanese, Sanskrit, all good. It percolates, it marinates, it finds its place. I hope it's finding its place with you, but maybe we can talk about that.